Castro read Venezuela's socialist president Hugo Chavez. He knew how to push hot buttons, which may explain why, on getting news of his passing, the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee said, quote, "Good riddance to this dictator." President Obama tonight was more diplomatic, saying the U.S. supports the Venezuelan people at this challenging time. Now, Hugo Chavez fought and lost a long battle with cancer. He fought a longer battle to reshape Venezuela to suit his own idiosyncratic and often eccentric vision, adding a star to the flag, changing Venezuela's time zone, ordering the nation's coat of arms altered on the suggestion of his then young daughter. Beyond those eccentricities, he spent 14 years challenging American influence in Latin America and the world and embracing global pariahs like North Korea and Iran. In a moment, I'm going to talk to Christian Amanpour and Larry King, who both spent time with the late president. But first, Jim Clancy on his turbulent years in power.
Siempre febrero!
The roar of applause was music.
Febrero,
The surging crowd, his dance partner. And for Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, politics was performance art.
Victoria!
The script came easily to Chavez. Anything that might warrant outrage in Washington wasn't a cause for concern, but rather the measure of success. Chavez beamed and embraced Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as the Iranian leader toured leftist Latin America. Knowing well the global concerns Tehran was aiming to develop the bomb, Chavez joked a nearby grassy knoll would suddenly open up and a nuclear warhead would sprout. They laughed. What Chavez really relished was playing on the world stage.
Ayer estuvo el diablo aquí.
Yesterday, the devil came here.
He ain't lying.
And it smells of sulfur still today.
Ah, the Caucasoid sulfur.
President George W. Bush used a day before. Hugo Chavez sniffed the air and made it personal, accusing the American leader of talking as if he were the owner of the world. When an earthquake rocked Haiti, Chavez claimed it was the result of U.S. weapons testing, an excuse to send American troops into the country. Chavez, of course, had humanitarian aid programs of his own. When cash-strapped Americans were shivering in the winter cold, Chavez volunteered Venezuelan oil to heat homes in the Bronx for free. Local politicians and local media turned out too. Chavez was never afraid to wield his oil wealth against his foes, or he'd use it to win friends and influence his neighbors. He once rewarded his 3 millionth Twitter follower with a new home. She was thrilled. So what if, as his critics said, the other 2,999,000 didn't get a thing? Online and in the streets, the crowds cheered. In the end, Hugo Chavez even suggested his cancer could be the result of an American conspiracy. He quoted Fidel Castro's warnings to be careful what he ate and watch out for small needles. The images of Hugo Chavez rallying the crowds, hurling insults and ridiculing his enemies survive. An official portrait of the Venezuelan leader. Even his staunchest rivals admit he could have been reelected again and again. That bombastic rhetoric, embraced by his supporters, embraced as the courage to stand up to the powers that be. It elevated him, and he knew it. Courageous, outrageous, it's what made Hugo Chavez larger than life. I'm Jim Clancy.
Well, he was 58 years old when he died. The funeral is now set for Friday. By the way, the suggestion in Jim Clancy's report that America somehow caused his cancer was neither the first nor the last touch of suspicion to come from Chavez's own government. Just today, officials accused 2 American air attachés at the embassy in Caracas of encouraging members of the Venezuelan military to try to destabilize the country. Joining me tonight on the phone, Larry King, who interviewed Chavez back in 2009, and Christian Amanpour, host of Amanpour. Larry, you actually met Chavez. You spoke with him about President Obama, President Bush, after he had some tough things to say about both men. And you asked him about that. I just want to play for our viewers some of what he had to say.
Don't you think that insults, Mr. President, don't harbor peace?
Well, if you talk about insults and name-calling, well, if we withdraw the insults and those name-calling, then we can have peace? Well, we need to do that, but all of us. Now, how Bush called me. The Bush government toppled me. They asked for my assassination. They disrespect us.
I'm wondering, Larry, how he struck you. I mean, did he believe that? Did he seem rational to you?
Christian and Hugo. There's something interesting, a lot of things interesting about the late Hugo Chavez. First, when he came into the studio, it's been a long day for me. I had taped Ahmadinejad in the morning, then I taped Chavez, and then I did Gaddafi, all the same day. They were here for the UN. Chavez came in, he spoke in English to me. We spoke about music, he spoke about his love of baseball, he knew everything about American baseball, he was jovial, hugging, and then we started the interview, he had an interpreter. I thought that was a little strange why he didn't just converse in English. He was very defensive. We went all over the lot on many things. He said that Bush tried to assassinate him, and he had proof because he had certain people confess that they were among the assassins. He said that Hillary Clinton would be a failure as a Secretary of State. This was in 2009, so Obama had been in office about 7 months at the time. I found him fascinating. It's an appropriate word, guys. He was, if he were an American politician or Republican Democrat, he'd been elected. He had a manner about him that was effusive. You couldn't help but like him while despairing of a lot of the things he did. So I found him terribly interesting.
Cristiano, how much did Chavez change not only Venezuela, but Venezuela's relationships with other nations?
Well, I think really a lot, and I think what Larry just said, I mean, all those people Larry interviewed in one day, I like to call it loosely, the axis of friendship that Chavez collected around himself, really sort of professionally kicking sand in the eyes of Uncle Sam, as one analyst put it to me. This was part of his international allure, the idea of standing up against the United States. And don't forget, while he had so many petrodollars, while the price of oil is so high, and he has the biggest oil reserves in the world, he was able to dispense a lot of largesse and therefore have a lot of friendships based on petrodiplomacy. Inside his country, he was the populist leader. He was the man who appealed to the poor, to the downtrodden, and you can see on the streets there is a lot of outpouring of grief for him. Obviously, in his later years, there were, the institutions, the Supreme Court, all sorts of institutions were compromised by him, but in the last election, he won 55%, his opponent won 44%, and it was the closest the opposition have come to him. And I think that's where people are going to be looking. Is his death a game changer for the future?
Larry, it's interesting him speaking in Spanish during the interview. I'm wondering how much of that was because he wanted the interview to be understood by people in Venezuela more than he was interested in it being understood by people in the United States. So that for him, the reason to do the interview, the target audience, was really the people back home.
I think that's a good point. Another thing unusual about him, Cristiano and Anderson, I really find this interesting, is that a lot of the leftist leaders are very anti-religious, but he professed to me to be a observant Catholic, totally believed in Jesus Christ, and was observant. By that,
Cristiano, it's interesting because you don't hear that, as Larry said, from a lot of some of the other leaders, certainly Catholic.
You don't. I mean, the pictures of him with Larry and him elsewhere, Hugo Chavez is always carrying a crucifix and sort of fingering it like worry beads. I'm not sure how much that played in terms of his cult appeal, but certainly the people of Venezuela are very religious, and perhaps there was a real sort of connection there. Look, no matter how much he was a pain in the neck to the United States and to other countries, he also, as I said, had this cult following, had this sort of populist leadership that played on a lot of the needs and desires of people in his own country. And even you're going to hear, and no doubt you're going to report on some of the praise that's come from the United States, some certain Congress people who have talked about how he put his oil at the disposal of the poor and dispossessed, not just at home, but in the U.S. and elsewhere as well. So he was somebody who knew how to play the crowd and who was 15 years president of Venezuela and was this cult. And now, can his chosen successor carry that on? Most people don't think that he will have that authority, that cult, that sort of charisma, if you like, to be able to maintain Chavismo at the level that Hugo Chavez did.
Yeah. Christian Amanpour, thank you. Larry King, great to hear you. Larry, thanks. Let us know what you think about the death of Chavez. Follow me on Twitter right now, @AndersonCooper.